Diddy trial. Week 6, jury shown, freak off. Videos before court adjourns for the day. The courthouse didn't hum, it held its breath. On the 6th week of one of the most closely watched trials in the country, silence was the loudest sound in the federal courtroom of Monaghan Courthouse in New York. It was the day the videos were going to be shown. Not just any videos, the ones everyone had whispered about since the trial began. The freak-off clips. The evidence buried deep in hard drives, mentioned in testimonies, feared for their power to shift perception. Until now, no one had seen them outside the investigative teams. The court was sealed. No public gallery, no media feed. Just 12 jurors, a judge, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and a truth waiting behind screens. Each juror had their own monitor. Each wore a headset. The prosecution insisted this was the only way to ensure privacy, dignity, and focus. No distractions, just the facts. And for one man, the newest juror, Juror 6's replacement, it was day one on the job. He was 57, a retired transit supervisor. Tall, a bit hunched at the shoulders, with an air of quiet order. When his number was drawn from the alternates, he nodded without surprise, like he'd been preparing in silence for this exact moment. He sat down, straightened his notepad, and adjusted the headset. Across from him, Sean Combs, known to the world as Diddy, sat motionless, his face a mask. Not proud, not broken, just unreadable. Next to him, his defense team leaned slightly forward, alert, but still. The lead attorney rested a pen across his knuckles, his thumb twitching once. Only once. The prosecutors remained upright, eyes fixed not on the screens but on the jurors. And in the middle of it all, Judge Arun Subramanian cleared his throat, gave one slow nod, and said, "Begin." Cassie's voice had already testified days ago. Her words echoed in transcripts. Her stare had held the courtroom in suspension. She spoke of parties that weren't parties, of pressure dressed as affection, of silence as the price of survival. But video would tell its own story. The screen blinked. Black frame, then color. A hotel room, dimly lit, shadows swaying like ghosts on wallpaper. A woman, Cassie, sitting on the edge of a leather couch. Eyes not on the camera but slightly above it, unblinking. A man enters, his face not shown. A voice speaks low and casual, but the content calculated. He gives instructions. There is no argument, only movement. The screen goes dark again. Another clip. Same setting. Cassie again. This time her eyes dart toward the camera, then away. Her shoulders tense. She says nothing. 30 seconds pass. The screen cuts to black. Then another. 7 clips. None longer than 30 seconds. Each one isolated, clinical, and carefully selected. None of them pornographic by legal standards, but together they form a psychological blueprint. Suggestion more than exposure. Intent more than action. By the 5th clip, no one was breathing loudly. The room was still. Even Diddy wasn't moving. The new juror kept his notes short. He wasn't writing what he saw. He wrote what he felt. She didn't speak. That was louder than words. Her eyes blinked 4 times, looked away each time. He never appeared, but he controlled the space. His hand trembled once as he set his pen down. After the final clip, the screens faded to a soft blue. The judge signaled the bailiff. The jurors took off their headsets, one by one. No sound, just the hush of fabric and breath. The prosecution made no comment. The defense team requested a recess. Judge Subramanian granted 15 minutes. The room slowly stood, not like a dismissal, but like survivors surfacing from underwater. In the hallway outside the chamber, no one spoke. The media, barred from the room, huddled around digital court sketch artists, begging for something. Anything. But the answer from everyone exiting was the same. Nothing to say. Inside, the judge remained. He glanced at the defense table, then at the empty jury box. He looked tired, not of the trial, but of the weight truth carried when delivered in silence. Cassie wasn't in the building that day. Her lawyer had advised against it. Let the image speak, they said. You already spoke your truth. Let them see what you endured. She sat in a hotel room across town, phone off. She stared at her hands, then the clock, then nothing. Across the city, clips of the trial trended, but not the videos. Those were protected. What spread were reactions, legal analysts debating consent, activists discussing silence, Twitter threads analyzing Cassie's body language in the testimony, TikToks showing courtroom sketches paired with quotes. But the 12 people who mattered, they said nothing, because they were thinking. And the man who had just joined them at 57 with a life behind him and silence before him knew this wasn't about the videos. It was about the moment after. He sat back in his chair, breathing slow. Diddy finally looked up. Their eyes didn't meet, not quite. But the moment was there. Heavy. Unspoken. When court resumed, the room was still subdued. Jurors filed back in without eye contact, each carrying their silence like an invisible robe. The 57-year-old man who had joined them that morning, no longer the alternate, now, the 12th piece of the jury's mind, adjusted his blazer and sat back in his chair. His face betrayed nothing but the pen in his hand, tapped once, then stopped. He had watched, he had seen. Now he would begin to decide. Judge Subramanian returned. His presence was quiet but commanding. "Let's proceed," he said. The prosecution stood. "We have one final summary witness," the lead attorney said. "Their role is to help the jury understand the timeline and context behind the materials you've reviewed." A woman stepped to the stand, late 30s, confident, a digital forensics expert. Her job to translate hard drives into human understanding. She projected a timeline on a screen facing the jury. Each dot was a date, each date a video, a message, or a payment. "We extracted metadata from multiple devices," she explained. "Some were seized from Mr. Combs' residence. Others were provided voluntarily by Ms. Ventura." She pointed to a cluster of dates. "These 5 videos shown earlier, all recorded within a 2-week span in 2019. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Then came messages, dozens of them, some logistical, some cryptic. One read, "Set it up again. Same hotel. Cassie knows what to do." Another, "She's hesitant. Remind her why she's here." Screenshots of wire transfers followed. Payments to unknown names, travel receipts, room service bills. No single item was illegal, but together they told a pattern. Back in the jury box, the man shifted. A pattern, yes. That's what he was seeing too. Later that day, the defense rose. They were poised, almost relaxed. The lead attorney walked to the center of the room and addressed the jury directly. "What did you really see this morning?" he asked. "You saw clips without sound, without context, without testimony beside them." He paused, then added, "Consent doesn't always look the same. Discomfort isn't always coercion." He clicked a remote. A slide appeared, a photo of Cassie smiling at a red carpet event during the time the videos were recorded. "Is this someone being trafficked?" he asked. Objection sustained. The slide came down. But the words hung there. The man in the jury seat looked at the table of evidence, then at Diddy, then down again. When court adjourned, it was nearly evening. The city outside had turned gold. He exited through a side door, not speaking to anyone. He didn't take the subway. He walked. Down blocks filled with strangers, through the noise of traffic and past glowing storefronts. His mind wasn't quiet, but his steps were steady. That night, he didn't watch the news. He sat at his kitchen table with the same notepad. On a fresh page, he wrote, "Truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes it's what nobody says that matters most." The next morning came with rain. He arrived at the courthouse early, coffee in one hand, notebook in the other. The clerk nodded at him. He nodded back. Inside, reporters milled about the hallways, speculating about today's session. Would Diddy speak? Would another witness be called? Would the videos resurface? He didn't answer questions, he just walked. Back inside the jury room, he reviewed his notes. Bullet points from the day before. Underlined thoughts. Circled words, hesitation pattern, silence. The other jurors began to trickle in. They exchanged brief nods. No conversation. Only one leaned close and whispered, "Hard to forget, huh?" He offered a small, understanding smile, harder to ignore. Court began with a surprise. The prosecution called a short recess. Behind closed doors, whispers turned into debate. A motion had been filed, a request to include previously excluded voice memos. The judge reviewed them during the break. Authentic, relevant, permissible. They would be played. Back in session, the courtroom dimmed slightly as the first audio clip began. Cassie's voice, shaky but clear. "I just want to go home. I didn't sign up for this again. I said no." A pause, then a man's voice, calm, controlled. "You know what this is? We've talked about this. You know why you're here." Another pause. Cassie again, "Why do I feel like I can't leave?" The audio ended. The courtroom remained silent. The impact was total. 3 more memos followed, each one threading more pressure, more persuasion, more power imbalance. At the end of the 4th clip, Diddy's defense rose again. They objected to tone, to interpretation, to lack of visual context. Objection overruled. The judge looked at the jury. "You are to consider these memos as part of the broader body of evidence, not in isolation, but as part of the whole." The man nodded slowly. The whole, that's what mattered. After court ended, he stayed behind for a moment. Looking at the now empty jury box, he imagined what the room had absorbed. Not just facts, but fear. Not just stories, but systems. He thought about Cassie's voice, the calm in the man's tone, the way silence had screamed louder than noise. Then he closed his notebook, tucked it under his arm, and walked back out into the world. The courthouse on Wednesday felt different, tighter. The building always carried weight, but today it seemed to sag beneath it. Maybe it was the humid air, or maybe it was the growing truth that what had once been just headlines and whispers was slowly, frame by frame, becoming undeniable. The jury was settled before the clerk even called them. Some stared straight ahead, others glanced down. The 57-year-old man was calm, more calm than he expected to be. He had stopped trying to guess what came next. He had started to listen better, not just with his ears, but with his whole presence. Court opened with a hotel staff member, 55, pressed uniform, practiced manner. She described recurring luxury bookings under corporate names, often paid in full, no ID required. Cassie's name wasn't always the one used, but the face was familiar. She checked in quietly, alone sometimes. Other times with company. It didn't always feel festive. The room held still. Next, the prosecution called a former bodyguard. Muscular, stone-faced, uncomfortable. He confirmed routines. She wasn't allowed to speak to anyone, not without clearance. Whose clearance? His. He nodded toward Diddy. Jurors looked up for the first time in 20 minutes. A former assistant took the stand. Her hands shook. She apologized repeatedly. "I tried to help, but everything was layered. If I said something, it came back on me. If I didn't, I felt like I was disappearing." She recounted long hours, last-minute errands, and strange silences. Once she said she walked in on Cassie, crying on the floor of a suite, makeup smudged, whispering, "I can't keep doing this." Objection sustained. Still it hung in the air. The jurors took notes, or pretended to. The 57-year-old man didn't write. He just held the image in his head. Recess came. They sat in the jury room eating cold sandwiches. No one spoke until Juror 5 asked, "Do we think this is enough, or are we still unsure?" The man said, "It's not about enough. It's about pattern. If you see a footprint once, maybe it's chance. But if every room has one, maybe someone lives there." A pause, then nods. Back in the courtroom, the defense took their swing. They brought in a celebrity psychologist. Suited, rehearsed, smooth. Fame changes the psychology of relationships. What you see on video may be a performance. Even trauma can be stylized when you live in front of cameras. He played old clips of Cassie in interviews, smiling, joking. "That's not fear," he said. "That's engagement." Then he showed text messages. Cassie thanking Diddy, calling him "my center." "Is that how victims talk?" he asked. Objection sustained, the damage done. But then came the journal. A forensic handwriting expert took the stand. Short, matter-of-fact. She validated the ink, the paper, the authorship. The screen lit up. Cassie's handwriting, a full page, words aching off the paper. He says he loves me, but I think love doesn't keep you from sleeping, or make you pretend to be someone you don't know. I feel erased. Polished on the outside, cracked in the middle. No one moved. The judge didn't need to ask for silence. Outside reporters waited. Cameras rolled. Sketch artists tried to catch glimpses through windows, but the jury stayed quiet. No expressions leaked. Inside, the man stared at his notebook, then turned to a blank page. He wrote, "When a person is slowly broken, you don't see pieces fall. You just see them stop moving." He underlined it twice. That evening he walked home. Not the subway, not a taxi. He needed the sidewalk, the wind, the chance to feel unmonitored. When he got home, he didn't turn on the news. He sat by his window. The journal image still burned in his mind. He thought of how the court tried to turn reality into debate, how lawyers made pain negotiable, and how truth was rarely loud. But when it whispered, it lasted longer. The morning after the journal page was shown, the courthouse seemed unusually quiet. Not just the halls or the courtroom, but the people themselves. Reporters whispered, security staff moved slower. Even the judge entered with a weight in his step. The atmosphere wasn't fatigue, it was gravity. Inside the jury box, the 57-year-old man arrived first. As usual, he set down his notebook and pen, not because he intended to write yet, but because it was a ritual, one of the few that remained untouched. The others followed. Nods replaced greetings, still no smiles. The shared experience of the past few days had reshaped the group. They weren't strangers anymore. They were co-authors of a decision. Court opened with a witness from Cassie's past, a childhood friend, now a social worker. Her tone was cautious but resolute. She was always bright, confident. But after she got involved with him, her light dimmed. I visited her once in L.A., maybe 2017. She was smaller, not physically, just smaller. The defense objected. Speculation sustained. But again the language lingered. She continued, "She didn't talk about pain. She talked about pressure, like she was underwater all the time, trying to smile through it." Then came a turning point. The prosecution presented a private text exchange between Cassie and a therapist, obtained legally, redacted carefully. Cassie had written, "It's like I'm in a play I didn't audition for, but I can't leave the stage. I don't even remember what silence feels like unless he's not in the room." Juror 4 shifted. Juror 8 wiped at their eye. The judge instructed, "You are to consider emotional impact only in context with surrounding evidence, not as standalone proof." But the 57-year-old man scribbled something anyway. "Silence, our safety, that's not normal." A second witness took the stand that day, a tech expert who had reviewed deleted files from Cassie's phone. "We recovered data from encrypted backups," he explained. Some videos were erased within 24 hours of recording, others stored in hidden folders. He paused. "What matters is the pattern, the cleanup, the control." He didn't show the videos, but he described their metadata, their timestamps, the consistent name of the sender when clips were forwarded, an assistant known to be working under Diddy's inner circle. The courtroom didn't stir, but the walls themselves seemed to lean in. After a lunch recess, the defense rebounded with another strategy. They called a branding consultant. She wore gold jewelry, a sharp blazer, and a rehearsed confidence. Cassie was not a victim, she was a collaborator, she said. She knew the brand, she helped build it, she was part of the show. She flashed slides, product launches, red carpet photos, music collaborations. This is not what entrapment looks like. Objection sustained. She ended with, "People can regret choices, but that doesn't mean they didn't make them." Back in the jury room, there was more conversation than usual. Juror 2 leaned in. She might have helped build something, but that doesn't mean she wasn't hurt by it. Juror 6 said, "We've all stayed in bad jobs, doesn't mean we liked them." The 57-year-old man remained silent, then finally said, If someone builds their own cage because they were taught it's the only safe place, is it still their choice? No one responded, but no one dismissed it either. The last witness of the day was unexpected, a retired music executive, once a mentor to Diddy. He didn't come to defend or attack. He came to tell the truth as he saw it. Sean was always brilliant, but he needed control. Every room, every narrative, every person. You either orbit him or you drift away. He sipped water. Cassie wasn't weak. She was just too close to the sun. Objection, sustained, but too late. The metaphor landed. That night, the man didn't go home. He walked to a cafe near the courthouse and ordered black coffee. He sat in the corner, far from the noise, and opened his notebook. He flipped to a blank page, wrote one word at the top: gravity. Then underneath, when someone says nothing for years and then says everything in fragments, do you measure the silence or the scream? He looked out of the window, watched people pass by, some laughing, some rushing, none of them knowing what was unfolding 2 blocks away. He didn't blame them. That was the point of power it hides, in plain sight. The next day opened with a kind of stillness that didn't need silence to be loud. The city hadn't changed, but something in the courthouse had. Maybe it was the weight of so many carefully measured truths. Maybe it was that all the details, once isolated now, had threads connecting them. The 57-year-old juror arrived before anyone again. He stood by the window in the jury room, staring at a gray sky. Rain hadn't come yet, but it hovered, like something withheld. When the rest of the jurors arrived, there was more than nods. There were shared looks, small acknowledgments. They were each carrying their own questions, but now at last, they were holding them in the same room. Court began with final clarifications. The prosecution walked the jury through a timeline, events, videos, messages, statements. Each piece snapped into place like frames of a puzzle that never advertised what it was meant to look like. Then the lead prosecutor said, "This case isn't about celebrity. It's about captivity disguised as choice." The words sat with them. Next came the defense's close, calm, clean, pointed. "None of you were there," the attorney said. "You don't know how love looks in someone else's mirror." He gestured to a photo, Cassie and Diddy embracing. "You've been shown fragments. And now you're being asked to make a mosaic from memory and implication." He walked closer to the jury. "Are you sure you're seeing what's real, or just what the prosecution hopes you will?" The man in seat 12 didn't flinch. He wrote one line: "Just because love is present doesn't mean harm isn't." During the lunch break, no one left the courthouse. They stayed in the jury room, all 12 of them. The air was full of potential words. Finally, someone spoke. "Do you believe her?" Juror 3 asked. "Yes," Juror 5 said. "No," said Juror 8 after a pause, "but I believe she was hurt." The 57-year-old man looked at them all. "Belief isn't about certainty, it's about where you place your trust when the facts become people." There was a moment of stillness, and then slowly heads nodded. When court resumed, there were no more witnesses, no more evidence. The judge gave final instructions, neutral tone, legal clarity. Then came the moment, the one none of them could rush, but none could delay. Deliberation began. Inside the deliberation room, 12 people became one machine, not of agreement, but of process. They began with facts, dates, messages, videos. They moved on to context, then came doubt, and finally belief. The 57-year-old man listened more than he spoke. He asked questions no one had considered. What would it take for her to lie about all this, and what would she gain from truth? Why were so many voices around her quiet until they weren't? And finally, what does it mean that the same pattern appeared in different people's stories years apart? They didn't rush. Hours passed. Arguments rose. Emotions surfaced. But there was also clarity. At one point, Juror 6 said, "It's not about what we wish happened. It's about what most likely did." And the man agreed. And what most likely did, he said, was built over time in silence behind smiles. By early evening, they had a decision. It wasn't unanimous at first, but by the time the final vote came, it was. They called the clerk. Court was reconvened. The gallery filled, reporters scrambled, the judge returned. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson stood. We have. The man felt his heart slow, not speed up, as if the weight was not just leaving but preparing to shift onto someone else. The verdict was read. The room didn't explode, it inhaled, slowly. Guilty. Not on every count, but on enough. Enough to matter. Enough to echo. Outside, the courthouse cameras flashed. Reactions spread, but inside the jury stayed a moment longer. No cheers, no handshakes. Just silence. The respectful kind. The kind that knows justice is not victory, it's responsibility. The 57-year-old man gathered his notebook, walked down the hall. He passed Cassie in the lobby. Their eyes met. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away. Neither did he. He kept walking, out into a city that didn't know it had just changed. He didn't sleep that night, not because of guilt, not because of relief, but because something inside him still hummed a quiet vibration that wouldn't settle. He sat at his kitchen table until the streetlights dimmed, notebook in front of him open but untouched. Rain tapped the windows, gentle but persistent. In his mind, the courtroom echoed, Cassie's words, the videos, the silence between each testimony, and Diddy's expression unreadable to the last moment. The next morning he returned to the courthouse for the final debrief. The court had offered closure, a statement from the judge, an optional roundtable with legal analysts, and the ceremonial conclusion of the jury's service. Most jurors came. They spoke in calm tones now, lighter but not carefree. The weight hadn't disappeared. It had just moved somewhere else. Judge Subramanian entered the jury room one last time. He thanked them for their service. His words were steady but sincere. You didn't just witness a trial, he said. You carried it, with discipline, with empathy, with discernment. He paused. And whatever the world says after this, know that you held the line. Some jurors nodded. Some blinked back emotion. No one spoke. Afterward, they gathered their things, slowly, as if packing up more than just belongings. The 57-year-old man stayed behind a moment longer. He looked at the empty chairs, the clean table, the box of tissues near the wall. Then he walked out. Weeks passed. The world moved on as it always does. Headlines faded, new stories took their place. But for him, the echoes remained. He returned to his normal routines, morning walks, afternoon errands. But something had shifted. He found himself noticing things, more snippets of conversation on trains, the way couples looked at each other, how people occupied space. Not suspicious, just aware. And sometimes he'd see flashes of the courtroom in unexpected places, in a parent scolding a child too sharply, in a boss speaking too close to a younger employee's ear, in the stillness of someone listening too hard and saying too little. He never interfered, but he never looked away. One day he walked past a bookstore. In the window, a display caught his eye, a memoir titled Unscripted Silence by Cassandra Ventura. He stepped inside. He didn't buy it, not yet. He flipped to the acknowledgments. Near the end it read, To those who listened even when I said nothing, you heard me anyway. He closed the book. Not because he was done, but because he didn't need more. He had already heard enough. But he returned the next week, bought a copy, and read it slowly. It wasn't about the trial, not entirely. It was about memory, shame, strength, and the strange grace of surviving something that tried to redefine you. He underlined passages, wrote notes in the margins, not as a juror, as a person who had once shared a room with a story waiting to be heard. Months later, he received a letter, handwritten, no return address. But he recognized the handwriting from the courtroom screens. It said, I don't know your name, but I remember your eyes. Thank you for seeing me, for helping others see too. No signature, but it didn't need one. He folded the letter carefully, placed it in his notebook, and finally he wrote a final line beneath all his notes. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet refusal to look away. Sometimes he walked by the courthouse, not because he had business there, but because some places remind you that the world can change in small rooms. He didn't need recognition, he didn't need validation, he only needed to remember. And he did.